It started with a quiet knock on the door and a letter that would change everything. James Walker, a retired Army veteran living on a fixed income, thought it was just another routine notice from the HOA. But when he opened it, his heart sank. They were demanding $10,000 in community improvement fees or threatening to take legal action against him. For James, who had sacrificed so much for his country, this wasn't just about money, it felt like a betrayal. But what the HOA didn't know was that their greed had set off a chain of events that would flip the entire neighborhood's power dynamic. James Walker had lived in this neighborhood for nearly 15 years. After serving 22 years in the Army and retiring with honor, he wanted nothing more than peace, stability, and a quiet place to call home. But from the moment the new HOA board took over, that peace started to crumble. At first, it was little things. Warning letters about his slightly faded fence, threats over the wrong shade of his mailbox, and citations for leaving his trash bins out a few hours too long. James, like many neighbors, thought these were just minor annoyances. But then came the letter that changed everything. The HOA was demanding $10,000 in special fees to fund a beautification project, claiming that every homeowner was responsible for covering their share. For James, who relied on a modest veteran's pension, this wasn't just unreasonable, it was impossible. He immediately called the HOA president, Karen Whitfield, to explain his situation, hoping for understanding. But her cold, clipped response sent chills down his spine. "Mr. Walker, if you can't afford to live here, maybe you shouldn't live here at all." That single sentence lit a fire inside him. As days turned into weeks, the HOA doubled down. They sent him daily notices, slapped fines on his account, and even threatened foreclosure if he didn't comply. To make matters worse, James discovered that several other residents, many elderly, disabled, or on fixed incomes, had received the same demand. The HOA claimed this project would increase property values, but no one had seen a plan, no budget breakdown, and no approval vote. Something wasn't adding up. James wasn't just angry, he was determined to find out the truth. He began attending HOA meetings, recording every word, and asking questions the board didn't want to answer. He learned that the HOA had quietly taken out loans without informing residents, and now they were trying to force homeowners to pay off the debt. Even worse, James uncovered evidence suggesting self-dealing, that several board members had signed contracts with companies they secretly owned. The tension in the neighborhood exploded. Homeowners began gathering in small groups, whispering about James's findings. Some were scared to confront the HOA, fearing retaliation, while others urged James to push forward. Late-night strategy sessions were held in living rooms and garages. The quiet suburban streets, once friendly and peaceful, had become a battleground between ordinary residents and a power-hungry board. But James wasn't alone anymore, and he wasn't done digging. He'd soon discover a legal loophole buried deep within the HOA's founding documents, one that could turn the tables completely. The board thought they had cornered him. But James was about to make a move so bold, so unexpected, that it would shake the entire neighborhood to its core. James spent countless sleepless nights combing through every single document he could find about the HOA, old meeting minutes, financial statements, and, most importantly, the original covenants and bylaws that governed the neighborhood. That's when he discovered something the board never expected anyone to notice, a legal loophole buried deep within the HOA's founding charter. According to the documents, the HOA was required to hold an annual financial disclosure and election of officers, something the board hadn't done in nearly 7 years. In other words, the current HOA leadership wasn't technically valid. The law was on James's side. If he could rally enough homeowners, they had the power to dissolve the existing board and call for a full election. James immediately began organizing his neighbors. Night after night, living rooms turned into war rooms. He printed copies of the charter, highlighted key sections, and handed them out door to door. At first, some were skeptical. Years of fear and intimidation had conditioned many residents to believe the HOA was untouchable. But once James showed them the financial discrepancies he uncovered, people began to wake up. The tipping point came when James obtained bank statements showing that the HOA president, Karen Whitfield, and 2 board members had approved massive payouts to a landscaping company, a company secretly owned by Karen's brother-in-law. It was a textbook case of self-dealing. Armed with evidence, James called for a special meeting, one that, by law, the HOA couldn't refuse. Word spread quickly, and by the night of the meeting, the community clubhouse was packed with angry homeowners. The atmosphere was electric, thick with tension and anticipation. James stepped up to the microphone, his voice calm but steady, and began laying out everything he had discovered. One by one, he revealed documents, emails, and bank records that left the audience gasping. Karen and the board tried to shout him down, threatening to call security, but it was too late. The crowd was on James's side now. People who had once feared the HOA were now demanding answers. By the end of the night, a motion was made to hold an immediate vote of no confidence. The results were overwhelming. The board was removed on the spot. Cheers erupted through the clubhouse. For the first time in years, the homeowners had control over their own neighborhood again. But James didn't stop there. When the dust settled, he proposed a radical solution. The community should collectively purchase the empty lots the HOA owned, property the board had been hoarding for future projects. With the help of other veterans, James secured financing and made an offer the HOA couldn't refuse. Within weeks, he became a partial owner of nearly half the neighborhood's undeveloped land. The very people who had tried to intimidate and bankrupt him had, through their own greed, handed him the ultimate victory. The days following the explosive HOA meeting felt like something out of a courtroom drama. Karen Whitfield and the ousted board members were furious, and they weren't about to surrender quietly. Within a week, James received a letter from their attorney accusing him of defamation, harassment, and illegally obtaining financial documents. But James wasn't intimidated. He had every receipt, every email, and every recording. Instead of backing down, he hired a veterans legal aid group to represent him for free, and together, they filed a counter-lawsuit accusing the former HOA board of fraud, embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary duty. The news spread like wildfire through the community. Local reporters showed up, and suddenly, James's quiet suburban street became the center of a heated public scandal. Neighbors who had once stayed silent began coming forward with their own horror stories, secret fines, intimidation tactics, and years of unexplained fees with no paper trail. Every story added fuel to the fire, and the HOA's reputation crumbled overnight. Behind the scenes, Karen tried desperately to regroup. She called emergency meetings with her allies, threatening lawsuits against anyone who dared testify against her. But it was no use. James had the documents, the numbers, and now, the neighborhood firmly on his side. Then came the breaking point. During discovery for the lawsuit, James's legal team uncovered something explosive. Karen and her board had been using HOA funds to pay for personal vacations, luxury spa treatments, and even a leased BMW, all disguised as community outreach expenses. It wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. The homeowners were livid. At the next community gathering, James stood in front of hundreds of residents and calmly explained how their dues had been siphoned away for years. The crowd erupted, demanding justice. The local district attorney soon got involved, launching a formal investigation into the former board. Facing mounting evidence and public outrage, Karen and her allies had no choice but to settle out of court. They agreed to pay back nearly $400,000 to the HOA's reserve fund and permanently step down from any leadership positions. With the corrupt board gone, James was elected as the new HOA president by an overwhelming majority. But he didn't just want the title, he wanted real change. The first thing he did was implement complete financial transparency. Every resident could now access HOA budgets, expenses, and meeting minutes online. He abolished unnecessary fines, reduced monthly dues, and launched actual community projects, ones residents had a real say in. But the biggest power shift came when James finalized the purchase of the undeveloped lots. With ownership of nearly half the neighborhood's future growth, he had essentially flipped the HOA's leverage in his favor. The man they once tried to bankrupt now had more influence over property values and community planning than any board ever had before. James had gone from being their target to becoming their biggest nightmare. Months after James Walker's stunning victory, the neighborhood looked, and felt, completely different. The fear and silence that once hung over the community were gone, replaced by unity, transparency, and trust. Neighbors who had barely spoken to each other before now attended community events, shared meals, and actually worked together to improve their homes. For the first time in years, people felt like they were living in a neighborhood, not under a dictatorship. But James's battle with the HOA wasn't just about reclaiming his peace, it became a symbol of standing up to abuse of power. Local news outlets followed his story closely, dubbing him the veteran who took down the HOA. Interviews poured in, and people from all over the country reached out for advice on how to fight corrupt boards in their own communities. James realized he had stumbled onto something much bigger than his neighborhood. He had become the voice for homeowners everywhere who were tired of being bullied by people who misused authority. Meanwhile, Karen Whitfield and the former board members had completely vanished from community affairs. After the settlement, they were barred from holding any HOA positions ever again, and the investigation into their misuse of funds stripped them of any remaining credibility. Some even had liens placed on their properties to repay the stolen money. What was once a power-hungry, controlling board had crumbled under the weight of their own greed. James didn't stop at just fixing his neighborhood. He set up the Homeowners Defense Alliance, a small nonprofit that connected struggling homeowners with legal resources, financial advisors, and investigative tools to hold corrupt HOAs accountable. What began as one man's fight for fairness became a movement. But James's personal victory came when he closed the deal on the undeveloped lots within the community. Owning nearly half of the neighborhood's future meant real influence. He negotiated fair property usage agreements, blocked exploitative developers, and ensured the land would actually benefit residents, parks, walking trails, and spaces for families instead of high-density condos the old HOA had been planning. The man they once tried to intimidate had become the gatekeeper of the neighborhood's future. In the end, James didn't just save himself from financial ruin, he reshaped an entire community. He exposed corruption, restored balance, and proved that even an ordinary homeowner can take down a system stacked against them. And here's the thing, James's story isn't unique. Across the country, thousands of homeowners are facing similar HOA nightmares, abusive fines, hidden fees, intimidation tactics, and even threats of foreclosure. Most feel powerless, until someone like James shows them what's possible when you stand your ground. If you've ever faced an HOA nightmare, or know someone who has, share your story in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to HOA Case Files for more shocking, unbelievable real-life battles just like this one. Because sometimes, the fight for your home becomes the fight of your life.